Well, the former president remains at Mar-a-Lago today in Florida as he faces possible legal action over an alleged payoff to an adult film star. He's also dealing with other investigations tied to the 2020 election. Police are bracing for possible violence if Trump is indicted, and there's a new warning from Homeland Security. Robert Costa is following all of this from just outside the courthouse in Manhattan. Robert, good morning.
Good morning, Anne-Marie. Former President Trump remains in Florida, huddled with his lawyers and with his advisors. And in a campaign fundraising appeal sent on Tuesday, Trump claimed that he could be arrested at any moment.
Guilty, guilty, guilty.
Demonstrators calling for an indictment of former President Donald Trump gathered Tuesday outside the district attorney's office in Lower Manhattan, while Trump supporters line the road leading to Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach. Along with fundraising, Trump has used the prospect of an indictment to rally Republicans.
I just think it just kind of reeks of political revenge.
And the tough part is with a local DA playing in presidential politics. If that starts right there, don't you think it'll happen across the country?
And Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul said the Manhattan DA, Alvin Bragg, should be put in jail. Responding to pressure, Bragg said he won't let baseless accusations deter us from fairly applying the law. Former Vice President Mike Pence, a potential 2024 rival, is discouraging protests of a possible indictment.
I think letting our voices be heard in other ways and not engaging in protests, I think is most prudent at this time.
If an indictment is issued, law enforcement sources say Trump would likely travel to New York, where he would surrender to authorities, be fingerprinted, photographed, and arraigned before a judge. A potentially chaotic scene.
I can assure you that the Secret Service will be with him every step of the way.
A.T. Smith is a former deputy director of the U.S. Secret Service and ran operations in New York.
Well, this is certainly an unprecedented event, to say the least, but the Secret Service is very well equipped to handle large crowds, large visits, things that are unique in the way of protection. They're planning ahead for anything that could go wrong.
And sources tell CBS News that the Secret Service, FBI, and NYPD are preparing for potential disruptions here in New York City, whether it's on the streets or in the tunnels. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., the Homeland Security Department there has issued an intelligence bulletin saying that some domestic extremists online see the potential arrest of former President Trump as a, quote, line in the sand. Anne-Marie?
Listen, Robert, I know we've been talking an awful lot about what's happening in Manhattan, but there are other investigations as well. There was a flurry of activity overnight in the federal investigation into Donald Trump's handling of classified documents at his home in Mar-a-Lago. What can you tell us?
This is a bit of a complicated case. You have former President Trump being investigated by the special counsel about his handling of classified material. Now Trump's lawyer in that case, Evan Corcoran, is being compelled to testify about his private discussions with Trump about those documents under what's called the crime fraud exemption. But it's still not clear whether Evan Corcoran will ultimately end up testifying before the grand jury. The Trump legal team and the special counsel are currently engaged in a legal standoff.
Okay, so back to Manhattan. You sort of went through a little bit of what we can expect if Donald Trump is indicted. We don't know what the charges would be, but the expectation is that, you know, the district attorney wouldn't be going through all this trouble if it wasn't at least, you know, a felony level, not a misdemeanor. Do we know how that would unfold? Would Donald Trump be required to sort of show up in New York immediately, or could he, you know, show up next week? How do these things usually happen?
Looking at precedent, when it's a white-collar crime like this, it's not someone who's committed a violent offense, and with a high-profile person like former President Trump, sometimes those details can be negotiated. But ultimately, in New York and elsewhere, if you are indicted, you do have to follow a certain process in terms of coming in, surrendering to authorities, being photographed, being fingerprinted, and then having an arraignment. in an open court. All those details, though, have not been negotiated based on CBS's latest reporting and talking with Trump's lawyers. They are still waiting to see what exactly happens with an indictment if it comes. What we do know is that the grand jury here in Manhattan Criminal Court could meet this afternoon, maybe even late this morning, but likely this afternoon. And if they do not want to hear from further witnesses, they could ultimately decide to take a vote on whether to indict former President Trump. And if that indictment comes today or sometime down the line, you have all the police here ready for a possible disruption from protesters. They're also privately coordinating with Secret Service and the FBI about how to handle threat assessments.
Before I let you go, some Republican members of Congress want to call the Manhattan District Attorney in for questioning. Do we know what that's about?
It's an unusual step to see congressional oversight of a city like this, a district attorney, during an ongoing investigation. I am not entirely clear, talking to congressional sources, how you would bring a DA before Congress to talk about an active investigation. But we are charting right now unprecedented waters in the sense of a former president possibly facing an indictment here in New York. And so you could see Congress try to figure out whether federal funds or federal capacities are being used in any way with this case, and they could argue they have some kind of oversight over that. But talking to sources here in New York, they do not expect Alvin Bragg, the DA, to testify at some point soon, if at all.
All right, Robert Costa, thank you very much.